Now for the news in detail. To contain the coronavirus pandemic, over 1.7 billion people across the world have been locked down as more countries impose curbs. The death toll from the virus has topped 16,500. Italy has reported 602 new deaths, bringing the total to 6,077, with nearly 64,000 infected. Meanwhile, in the UK, 54 people have died in the past 24 hours, taking the toll there to over 300, with more than 6,600 confirmed cases. This report has the details.
While the world struggles to develop a vaccine for the fatal COVID-19, the virus continues killing thousands across the world every day. Zimbabwe lost its first life to the disease, while Myanmar reported its first case. New Zealand and the UK have now imposed a virtual nationwide lockdown that will be enforced by the police.
People will only be allowed to leave their home for the following very limited purposes: shopping for basic necessities as infrequently as possible, one form of exercise a day, for example, a run, walk or cycle, alone or with members of your household, any medical need to provide care or to help a vulnerable person, and travelling to and from work, but only where this is absolutely necessary and cannot be done from home.
Russia has sent 11 planes carrying military specialists and equipment to the crisis-hit Italy. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization is shipping COVID-19 test kits to Uganda as cases in the East African country rise. The global health body has warned that the pandemic is accelerating, as it took just 4 days for cases to reach 300,000 from 200,000.
The pandemic is accelerating. It took 67 days from the first reported case to reach the first 100,000 cases. 11 days for the second 100,000 cases. And just 4 days for the third 100,000 cases.
But amid rising cases and deaths in the US, President Donald Trump says he wants to reopen the country for business in weeks, not months. Without quoting any evidence to that effect, Trump claims continued closures can result in more deaths than the pandemic itself.
The number of coronavirus infections across Pakistan has risen to 892 in 24 hours. Provincial governments of Sindh, Punjab, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan have ordered a shutdown amid the virus's spread. Giving a media briefing, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister on Health Services, Dr. Zafar Mirza, said out of all infected cases, 5 are critical, while 6 have recovered. He said there are over 7,700 suspected cases in the country. Mirza said nearly 4,900 people have been quarantined. He added that so far 7 people with the infection have died across the country. The southern province of Sindh has 399 infection cases, while Punjab has 249. In Balochistan, 110 people are infected. Gilgit-Baltistan has reported 80 cases, while the capital city Islamabad has 15 people with the infection. The World Health Organization says members of the G20 group of nations should demonstrate solidarity in tackling the new coronavirus pandemic. Finance ministers from the world's 20 largest economies have agreed to develop an action plan to respond to COVID-19. G20 leaders are due to gather for an extraordinary virtual summit in the coming days as the world races to contain the virus. The WHO Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus called for political coordination at the global level to cope with the crisis.
This week, I will be addressing heads of state and government from the G20 countries. Among other issues, I will be asking them to work together to increase production, avoid export bans, and ensure equity of distribution on the basis of need.
The IMF and World Bank have both forecast that the pandemic will trigger a global recession in 2020. In India, authorities have forcefully removed all sit-ins against the controversial Citizenship Act in different cities amid a lockdown in the country. 30 states and union territories across India announced a shutdown after the country reported its 9th death due to COVID-19. After 101 days, police in New Delhi removed the Shaheen Bagh sit-in that has been at the heart of countrywide protests. Officials said female protesters were removed despite their refusal to end the sit-in in Delhi. They said they have detained at least 9 people, including 6 women. Authorities also removed protest sites from Jafarabad, Jamia and Turkman Gate in the Indian capital. The Indian government has been facing countrywide protests against the law since December 11th. Well, the ruling Indian party BJP's Shivraj Singh Chauhan has been sworn in as the Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh after toppling the elected Congress government. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's party formed the government through horse trading after 22 Congress lawmakers switched their loyalties. The resignations pushed Congress government into minority, leading to Chief Minister Kamal Nath's resignation on March 20th. Chauhan took oath as Chief Minister for the 4th time, 15 months after his government was voted out of power. Earlier, Chauhan was elected the leader of the BJP's legislature party at a meeting of MLAs held at the state BJP headquarters. Last year in July, the central ruling party toppled the state government of Karnataka in a similar manner. Afghan President Ashraf Ghani says he met and offered Abdullah Abdullah a major role in the peace process, but he stresses change in the constitution. The president issued a statement after the U.S. announced a $1 billion cut in its aid to Afghanistan after failing to break the political deadlock. In a statement, Ghani said Abdullah wants a new political structure that is against the constitution. Ghani also said his talks with U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo were positive and constructive. Self-proclaimed President Abdullah Abdullah said Pompeo's visit was a good opportunity to resolve political issues, but was lost. Abdullah said continued U.S. cooperation is vital in ensuring the national interests of Afghanistan and peace in the country. In Qatar, the U.S. and the Taliban have discussed the implementation of the Doha deal, including a speedy prisoner release and the start of intra-Afghan talks. Taliban spokesperson Sohail Shaheen says U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met Taliban leader Mullah Baradar in Doha to discuss possible ways forward. Shaheen said both leaders discussed the ceasefire, permanent peace, and the future political system for the Afghan people. The spokesperson said Pompeo assured that American troops are being withdrawn from Afghanistan as per their schedule. Earlier, Pompeo met President Ashraf Ghani and former Chief Executive Abdullah Abdullah during his day-long visit to Kabul. Yemen's Houthi rebels have warned the Saudi-led government coalition of carrying out preemptive strikes against any offensive operation. In a statement, Houthi spokesman Yahya Sadi says the group possesses deterrence weapons, including ballistic and winged missiles. Sadi threatened the coalition that they should expect thousands of ballistic missiles in the near future. He said Houthis killed and wounded over 10,000 government troops since the beginning of the aggression 5 years ago. Yemen has been beset by violence and chaos since 2014. The Arab League has called on the international community to exert more pressure on Israel to release Palestinian prisoners. In a statement, the body's Assistant Secretary General Saeed Abu Ali said Israel must provide prisoners necessary protection amid the spread of coronavirus. Abu Ali said the rules of international humanitarian law have become more urgent in light of the pandemic. He said it is important to pressure occupation forces to save the lives of over 5,000 prisoners. Abu Ali also held occupation authorities responsible for the lives of Palestinian prisoners. He stressed that the global community must assume its responsibility to ensure their release. Turkey says it has killed 6 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in northern Syria. The Defense Ministry says the fighters were killed during Operation Peace Spring. The ministry said it would not stop the operation against militants in the region. Ankara says the operation is aimed at establishing a safe zone on the border to resettle some Syrian refugees in the country. Ankara holds the fighter group as responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year-long conflict. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has accused the U.S. and its allied SDF of continuous theft of Syria's oil. Syrian state media said in a meeting, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Assad discussed the situation in the U.S.-occupied northeastern Syria. Assad said the U.S. has captured all key oil fields in the northeastern region, calling it a heist. In a statement, Russia's defense ministry says the two sides discussed issues of ensuring a stable cessation of hostilities in the Idlib de-escalation zone. It said they also spoke about various aspects of military technical cooperation in the joint fight against international terrorist groups. Meanwhile, Syrian air defense says it intercepted a drone in the vicinity of the Hmeimim air base near the coastal city of Jable. In Libya, 2 miners have been killed in an artillery attack by Khalifa Haftar's eastern forces in southern Tripoli. The UN-recognized Government of National Accord says the casualties were reported after a house collapsed after the attack. GNA spokesman Mohammed Kununu says 6 people have been killed in a violation of the ceasefire during the last 48 hours. Libya has been torn apart by a civil war between the GNA and the Libyan National Army since April last year. Despite multiple efforts and ceasefire agreements brokered by the UN, both sides have been unable to agree upon a truce. A series of 57 moderate and minor aftershocks have rattled Croatia's capital, Zagreb. This follows the 2 earthquakes of magnitude 5.3 and 5.0 that hit Zagreb on Sunday. The European Mediterranean Seismological Center says the aftershocks with a magnitude from 2.0 to 3.3 were registered 6 to 7 kilometers north of the city. The tremors knocked out electricity and internet transmission to certain areas. 200 servicemen continue to clear the city's streets of the debris, and over 300 more are on high alert to join the effort. The U.S. Congress and White House officials say they are close to agreeing on a $2 trillion coronavirus aid package. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin says a deal is expected today as talks run late into the night. Mnuchin and Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer said they had spoken by phone with President Donald Trump during the long night of negotiations. While the two sides have resolved many issues in the sweeping package, some remain. Schumer also reiterated the Democratic Party's desire to conclude the deal today and vote on it this evening. Earlier, Trump slated the Democrats for including open border and Green New Deal measures in the aid package. U.S. Secretary of Defense Mark Esper says the coronavirus pandemic can impact the combat readiness of the American military. Esper said despite the fast-spreading illness, the U.S. military remains capable of conducting national security missions. Esper said the decrease in the combat readiness may happen due to the cancellation of a number of exercises. He said the U.S. military will set up field hospitals in New York and Seattle, subject to Federal Emergency Management Agency's approval. The defense secretary admitted the Pentagon was unable to help every state, as FEMA holds the authority to prioritize requests. Esper said Pentagon tests its staff regularly and has already reduced the numbers by about 60%. Earlier on Monday, the Pentagon said 133 soldiers had contracted the illness, as 7 are hospitalized, while 4 have recovered. The U.S. Federal Reserve has rolled out a massive array of programs to backstop an economy reeling under sweeping restrictions amid a coronavirus crisis. The announcement marks a new chapter in the Fed's money printing as it commits to expanding its balance sheet as necessary. More in this report.
The coronavirus pandemic has rattled the global economy as it heads towards recession. The U.S. Central Bank, for the first time, has announced to purchase corporate bonds and to backstop direct loans to companies worth trillions of dollars. It has pledged easy access to credit lines for small and medium businesses, promising to expand its asset purchases by as much as needed to stabilize markets. Economists believe the steps taken are in the right direction.
So I think that the Federal Reserve, when we look back at this, I think the Federal Reserve is acting very quickly. It's building on the playbook that it developed in the 08-09 crisis, but extending it. For example, it's including it's including muni bonds in its program.
President Donald Trump praised the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell for an extraordinary policy measure.
Today I called up Jerome Powell and I said, Jerome, you've done a really good job. I was proud of him. That took courage. And ultimately, you're going to see the fruits. Now, he's not finished. I mean, he's got other arrows in the quiver, or whatever they say. I will tell you, he's got plenty of arrows. But no, I'm very happy with the job he did.
The multi-trillion-dollar programs are backed by the Treasury Department to ensure that the Fed does not lose money.
The World Health Organization says the coronavirus outbreak will overwhelm war-stricken Yemen's health system. The body's representative in Yemen, Altaf Musani, says the WHO has placed teams on high alert to help the country's fragile health system. Musani said the body has increased the distribution of vital medical gear and test kits to combat the outbreak. He warned that only 50% of the country's health system is operational, which is insufficient to tackle coronavirus patients. Yemen has not officially reported a single case of COVID-19, but the WHO says it is scaling up preparedness and response efforts in case of infections. Well, it is an unaffordable luxury for millions in war-ravaged Yemen. Clean water is dangerously scarce there. This report has more.
Yemen's broken healthcare system has yet to register any cases of the novel coronavirus. But if the pandemic does hit, the impact will be unimaginable in a country where 5 years of conflict has created the world's worst humanitarian crisis.
If the virus spreads in Yemen, it will be a disaster in the whole country because of the lack of medical supplies and qualified staff and health centers in villages.
According to the UN's Children Agency, nearly 18 million people, including 9.2 million children, do not have regular access to safe water. Only 1/3 of Yemen's population has access to piped water.
I wake up every day at 7:30 in the morning. I prepare the donkey and go to bring water. Then I take my breakfast and I go back again to bring water. I go back and forth several times to bring water until 10 in the morning.
Yemen suffered one of its worst ever outbreaks of cholera in 2017. Years of underinvestment in public water and sanitation systems provided the foundations for this outbreak.
The diseases that are transmitted by the polluted water are, for example, cholera, amoebiasis, and diarrhea. Moreover, the water is not suitable for drinking due to a high percentage of salt in it.
Doctors Without Borders says in current situation of Yemen's healthcare system, it would be a disaster if the new coronavirus reached the country.
Well, the global economy has been projected to contract 1.5% in 2020 due to the massive impact of the ongoing COVID-19 outbreak. In a report, the Institute of International Finance doubts the possibility of consumer and investment activity rebounding quickly once quarantines are lifted.
The report says spreading pandemic, OPEC price war, and mounting credit stress in markets are reshaping the foundations of global economy. It says the partial economic shutdown can cost Germany up to nearly 21% of GDP. Meanwhile, Lebanon has decided to stop paying all Eurobonds in US dollars. The EU has announced to give 20 million euros in humanitarian aid to Iran, reeling under US sanctions, and is one of the worst hits of pandemic. The bloc's foreign policy chief Joseph Borrell says EU has also agreed to back requests made by Iran and Venezuela for IMF financial support. South Korea has doubled its economic rescue package to $80 billion to save companies, stocks and bond markets. Thailand has also approved additional stimulus measures of over $3 billion in a bid to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 pandemic.
Let's now find out what the weather is like around the world. For the latest updates on these and other stories, you can always follow us on our social media at Indus.news. Thanks for watching.